It's Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern, so you know what that means. It's time for another episode of Hashtag Event Icons, presented by Endless Events, the show where you get to ask the icons of the events industry anything. So, you might be wondering, how do you get to ask questions? All you have to do is use the question panel on the right of GoToWebinar to submit your questions. Or you can hop on Twitter to submit your questions with the hashtag EventIcons. We'll be answering your questions live during the entire show. Before we get started, the more people we have watching, the better conversation we can have. So please help share hashtag EventIcons on Twitter and Facebook. Just tell your friends to watch at www.event-icons.com. Now, without any further delay, this is Hashtag Event Icons with your hosts, Will Curran of Endless Events, Laura Lopez of Social Tables, and Brant Kruger of Event Technology Consulting.
All right. Welcome, everybody, to Event Icons. I am Brant Kruger. Will and Laura are on assignment this week. They're both unavailable to be joining us, but we are being joined by some fantastic guests from Core Apps. Now, if you haven't heard of Core Apps is an event technology provider that's going to be giving you just about everything from the kitchen down to the kitchen sink when it comes to event technology. They're doing mobile apps, show management, kiosks, audience response, the whole 9 yards, and we're really happy that you guys could be joining us here because this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. So we're going to be talking about event security, specifically a lot to deal with event cybersecurity and how it can really impact our events these days. So we are being joined, without further ado, with by Jon Johnson. Jon, who is the CTO of Core Apps. Jon, thanks for joining us. Absolutely. Thank you for having me. And I'm sure I'm going to be mashing the names up the whole time that we're doing this because we also, in addition to Jon Johnson, we have Jay Tokosch. I'm sorry, I should have asked before. Is it Tokosch?
It's Tokosch.
Tokosch, all right, who is the CEO of Core Apps, and we are going to, like I said, be talking about event security. Jay, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
All right, we always start with the softballs before we get into the heavy-duty stuff. So, Jon, why don't we start with you? What got you into the events industry?
Sure. So before Core Apps, I spoke at several different events. There was the most memorable one probably was a conference called MacHack, and it was back in 2003 and 4 that I spoke, and I actually was sessions chair one of those years. I don't remember off the top of my head. I also helped organize some of our internal user conferences for a company that I worked at back in the day. But I kind of took a break from kind of the events stuff when I started another job, and towards the end of that's where I met one of the other co-founders of Core Apps, and he had the idea of starting a mobile app for trade shows and events, and so we got back into the industry, and I've been loving it ever since.
Very good, very good. And Jay, how about you?
Well, you know, this is kind of it's an interesting story. I'll try and do the shorter version of it, but essentially what happened was one of the other co-founders and I attended CES, and we were there working together on another company, and we were looking for a couple of different exhibitors and vendors that were supposed to be on site there, and could not find them. We were using their paper maps. We were using everything that they had to get there, and lo and behold, I had an iPhone 3G. And I said, you know what? This would be great if there was an app for this. And we need to come up with the way that it was. So over the course of the week while we were there, Jesse and I, in the suite that we had paper up on the walls laying out everything that the app was supposed to do from one transition to the other transition with a screen, and deciding how this would look. And honestly, we really thought that we were going to do this app to fund the other company that we were doing. And once we got it started and we brought Jon on board, it went so well that we ended up, you know, becoming and forming a company, and this is our sole focus now. And it's, you know, 800 customers, you know, and counting, and that's where we are today.
That feels like a very Silicon Valley moment. The HBO series, just up in the hotel room.
Except I didn't say in a garage, right? I mean, that was the only difference there.
Right, exactly. It's always in a garage or in a hotel room or somewhere along those lines. But so What do you think you guys would be doing if that hadn't happened? I mean, so Jay, if you hadn't had that kind of epiphany while you were at that show, where would your career have taken you?
Yeah, I'm an entrepreneur. This is my sixth company, so somewhere involved in technology for sure. Generally, I usually keep the companies between 3 to 5 years, sell them, move on to the next one. We're into this one for 8. I love it. I love the industry. I love the people.
Long in the tooth there.
Yeah, I know. Everybody keeps saying, "What's going on with you?" No, I love the people and I love the industry, and I find it very interesting. And I keep learning. So I'm learning something new every day. We released a new product recently, and I learned something that just amazed me about it. And I went, you know what? That's why I'm here. That's why I like this.
And John, how about you?
Yeah, I probably be doing about the same thing. I am also an entrepreneur at heart, but I, for the sake of paying the bills, would take on regular jobs in between ideas and contracting gigs and that sort of stuff. And so I also, all of us thought that we would probably sell after 5-ish years or whatever and move on. But we really do enjoy this industry, and so the great thing is that I'm the head of the tech department here, and I get to experiment and learn all of the new stuff. And if you talk to any geek, that's exactly what they want in a job. So I'm perfectly happy here, and I'm happy trying to give that same enjoyment of being able to see and use cool technologies to the rest of our team.
Very good, very good. My first non-softball question is in a way I think kind of the most important as we open up this discussion, and that is basically why should we be paying attention to tech security in the meeting event industry? I mean, I think sometimes we as people who are thinking about this stuff, it seems kind of obvious to us, but a lot of times when you start pitching this stuff to kind of standard folk out there in the world, I start to glaze over a little bit and go, yeah, there's a lot of problems out there. So why, as an industry, do we need to start talking seriously about event tech security?
Well, and we just had the whole thing that went on last Friday, but I think from our standpoint, the app has garnished more and more content since we began. And each time we add more content, we're also trying to collect and use that with regards to the attendees who are actually using it. So when you factor all of those pieces together, what you're really talking about here now is an attendee who's giving you very personal information that you're keeping, and you're trying to match that up, and you're trying to do things with analytics, and you're trying to also provide some sort of networking type of infrastructure inside of the technology that you're using and all of those things. But at the end of the day, you also have to protect that person's privacy, and you need to secure the information that you're getting. And so when we talk to our clients, particularly the organizers, we do bring that up. We do mention to them, the things that they're sending over. It's part of our contract. It's generally something that, they many times just sign off on, but we feel responsible to make sure that we are protecting that, and so that way everybody feels comfortable using the technology itself.
I think another part of that is that we need to recognize that trust is easy to be given initially. People are wanting to trust each other. They want to believe that everyone is doing the best they can to make sure everything goes smoothly. But once you've lost that trust the first time as an event organizer, if you were a target of a hack or a data leak or whatever, people are going to take longer to trust you again with their personal information. And so even if you've never been hacked before or never had any security incidents before, it's really important to take it seriously, because you don't want to have to be in the situation where you're trying to recover your name and trying to get your brand built back up again.
Well, and some of the pushback that I've seen is people just don't see it as being high value information. Well, it's just names and addresses and things like that for the registration site. But if you know the company, and you know who the CEO is and who the CFO is, and who all of those relationships, you can start data mining that pretty easily and figure out, and then you can use that as the tip of a spear on an attack. So yeah, it might seem like it's not that important, but especially for independent meeting planners who are going out and contracting with larger companies, financial companies, medical companies, and things like that, you can start to see where that information becomes more and more valuable even down, and like you say, where we're starting to track now what sessions people went to, and so all of a sudden you can see that Cindy, the COO, went to this session and that session. Now you can send her an email that looks like it came from Phil, the CFO, and said, hey, what did you think about that? Here's the follow-up information. Click on this link and away we go. And it's all of a sudden the whole thing is owned.
Well, and Brent, with regards to that, we have clients who have presented us what they did in the past with, as much as a booklet that they'll hand out that has pictures and information and contact information for all of the attendees that they've handed out in the past, and they say, hey, listen, we want to put that directly on the app. And I say, well, do you have permission to do that? And they say, well, no, but it's what we've always done in the past. And I'm like, well, what you got away with in the past wasn't legal. What you can do today with today's technology and the way that this is, today's landscape is not the same. And by doing things like that, you're not only violating their privacy, we're causing a whole big security issue that's going on here. So we have to educate them. I think that's part of the reason that we wanted to be on this as well, is to educate our clients, other people out there who are doing technology and want to learn what they should and what they shouldn't do, and how to make sure that they're protecting their constituents.
And what I'd love to go into, if we have time kind of towards the end, is some of more of the lower level stuff, what the planners themselves can do, what maybe attendees can do as far as security goes. But for now, let's kind of keep it up at the level where you guys are at and talk about some of the precautions that Core Apps does and that you and your team are making on the apps and the management software. And when you're managing other people's data, what kind of precautions do you guys have to put in?
Sure. One of the biggest things that we started doing initially with the company is, because Jay is absolutely right with his stories of people wanting to put all sorts of seemingly private information straight into the app for every attendee to have, is we took a hard stance against accepting data that seemed too personal. Like someone would tell us they want this in the app, before they even sent us the data, which they were ready to do, we would tell them that's just not a good idea. And our biggest philosophy still to this day is, we don't want to take data that shouldn't be given to us in the first place. I think that's one of the things that all organizers should be aware of is, they can control what all data goes to what vendors, and you should kind of think about that a little bit before you just blindly send a full list of everything, that all the demographic information, everything about all the attendees at your show to a mobile app company. Some of it's probably necessary to help import their schedules and stuff, but not all of it, But yeah, so we definitely take a stance on trying not to put data in that we think is too personal. And also we recognize that people's phones, while you like to think of them as secure, there are people who run jailbroken iPhones. There are people who run insecure versions of Android that are rooted, that they can have direct access to file system. And so the moment the data is in a mobile app on a phone, people can gain access to it. So one of the older incidents that happened with a mobile app provider, I can't remember who it was. I guess I wouldn't really want to name them anyways.
We probably should leave them nameless. Yeah.
What happened was they included the entire attendee list. It wasn't visible in the app if you just ran the app, but it was in the database on the device. And so a clever person at this conference that was about security of all things
yes,
looked at the SQLite database and was able to get the entire attendee list, even though it was never actually displayed in the app. So that's another precaution that we have is making sure that when we have data that is personal, that we definitely don't ever send it to places that aren't supposed to have it in the first place. So I mean, we do a lot of stuff, and it's kind of hard to think about all the stuff that we do, but we definitely take a lot of care and precaution about where we allow data to flow through our systems, and of course, store it in very secure systems when we do have it.
And here's the thing, Brett, about that too, is that coming from the sales side or coming from the side working with the actual, clients, is that, there's a fine line. We're trying to also, give a lot of features and functionality without taking that away, because we have to be careful of the security. So there's that line that you have to balance and make sure that what you're really doing here is you are protecting the people, but you're also keeping your features and functionality up to be able to let them network, to be able to do some of the things that they want to accomplish, whatever goals that they set out with us at the beginning of using the technology in the first place.
I think you guys hit on two really important key points there, and one is to never turn over more data than you have to. Both on the vendors, that's a good lesson for both the vendors and the planners themselves, is never accept more data than you have to, and never turn over more data than you have to, because as we know, we know that third-party vendors are attack points right now. The Home Depot hack, the Target hack, those all came from third-party vendors coming in through the side door. So we know that the bad guys are out there looking for those side channels in. And then the other thing that I think you hit on there, Jay, is there's always a trade-off between security and convenience. And so we're trying to provide all these services through our event tech, and we keep pushing and pushing and pushing to make it better and cooler, and deliver all of this important information to the planners and to the attendees, but then you're taking a little bit greater risk of that.
Right.
Yeah, I think one of the one example of that that we also do is we have a feature that allows you to log into your online planner, regardless of if the online planner is hosted elsewhere, and the credentials picked for being able to log into your planner very often are badge number and last name, and that is something that you can find. Like, if you happen to be next to someone, you can look at their badge, quickly get their badge number and their last name easily, and now you could log into the mobile app, and if you wanted to be malicious, you could post things as if you're them. You could see their schedule to be able to stalk them if you're a stalker. There's all sorts of small malicious things you can do with that. But the other reality is that a lot of people have common last names. And if you have a famous person, Steve Jobs, they'll pick someone who's not alive anymore. You know his last name already, and a lot of badge numbers still are sequential these days. So if you know the rough range of a badge, you could sit there and just farm out trying to log in as that famous person inside of a mobile app, or even online planners. Online planners often use the same type of login system. So that's an example of convenience over security. Is the more secure way to do it is either SSO with some online provider like Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, or username and passwords. That's a tried and true method that allows people to pick their own level of security.
And I've been on more than a couple of shows where the username and password was the name of the show. And fairly well publicized. I want to kind of walk through, kind of start to finish, as when we start looking at a show, and so starting from the beginning. What are the things that a planner should consider when they're looking at event technology? So what are the security questions that they should be asking their providers? What should they be looking for? And this actually relates to a question that came in from the audience from Hans, that how do we recognize the level of security either as a user or as a planner? How do we know where we're at in this process?
Yeah, some of the questions that I would ask, so how do you know? It's really hard. The reality is that most of the time your interaction with a vendor is going to be their professional website, which probably is not the same website or admin portal that you might use for their services. You might be demoed it, but more than likely than not, you're probably being walked over that either in an in-person demo or over a webinar type thing. So you're not really interacting with the system directly during that demo, and you're being sold ahead of time. So really, you're right. It's kind of what kind of questions can you ask? And I think the key ones that I would focus on are, is everything that you transmit over the internet done over HTTPS or secure sockets layer? which is basically the de facto standard. If you go to your bank's website, you'll see that little green icon. And in fact, a lot of websites have it nowadays because there was a big push several years ago to try to do SSL everywhere was the phrase that everyone used. And so if you don't see that green icon on the websites and the admins that you're using or their checkout flows, that's a really big red flag. But ask them, is everything that you do over SSL? And if they hesitate to say yes, then maybe they know something isn't quite right. I mean, we made a big push over longer than that, more than 5 years ago, to make sure that every piece of personal data, anytime that actual user data is being exchanged, was done over SSL, and everyone should be doing the same thing.
Yeah, and I think, just to elaborate a little bit on what John was saying, one of the things, I don't think that the organizers ask enough, and they don't ask this question frequently enough. So I know what we try to do, because I come from the sales side of it, and what we try to do is when we sit down with the client, we talk about their goals and the focus and what they want to do with their technology, but we also will say to them things like, so from a security standpoint, you should consider this based on maybe a goal that they may tell us. Like, we want to network people together. We want them to be able to make meetings together with each other. We want to be able to do things like that. And I just use that as an example. So then we discuss how the security would work for something like that so that they understand from our point of view that we are concerned with that. I don't know that other vendors do that. I'm just saying that's how we come at it, because they don't ask that question. They just tell us the goal is this, and I think, achieving the goal is one thing, protecting everybody while you're achieving the goal is something else.
Well, yeah, absolutely. No matter what the technology, we always want to be starting with the goals and then back our way into the technology from there. Jay, I'd like you to expand, Jay, a little bit. I mean, from the sales side, are you being asked these questions? I mean, are people expressing concerns about security? Are they coming to you and saying, okay, are you doing things with everything in SSL and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I can tell you that I can't remember the last time SSL was mentioned. So
no, really,
no one that's a no-go. Everyone, we've seen it on an RFP maybe a few years ago, I would say, but at this point, no. I think that most clients that we talk to are either on one side of the fence or the other. And the one side of the fence, which is non-existent questions, nothing, is a much bigger side of the fence. The ones that do, they've probably experienced something that in the past with another provider that hasn't worked very well and had a problem for them. So that's really, in my opinion, why they probably brought that up. But no, they don't. And like I said, we still feel obligated to make sure that we're, bringing it up and educating them about how we do things so that they understand and they feel comfortable when we say to them, we should do single sign-on here, we should pull it from this and not do it the other way, because this is what your goal was to do inside the app. This is the information that's inside here. Now, if somebody comes to us and says, everything that we're going to give you is totally available to anyone on our website at any particular time, night or day, then the app's wide open. We don't care. That's perfectly fine. We all get that. And there's plenty of that goes on too. I will say that part of what John was mentioning before is what you send over to us, if it needs to be confidential, if it needs to be protected. But things like exhibitor information, things like where the exhibitor lists and sessions and speakers and all of those types of things that are widely acceptable content that does not need any protection, then the app's wide open, and we don't want a barrier to entry.
And it's great. I mean, it's great that you guys are thinking along those lines, because if they're not coming to you and asking these questions, then we as technology folks need to be saying,
right,
taking those goals and saying, okay, here are the risks, here are the advantages, and here are the things you need to be aware of. So that kind of covers the leading up to and the choosing of the software and that kind of stuff. Once we're there and we're at our event, I know a chunk of what you guys do is audience response technology, and I'm a huge fan of audience response technology, and as a tool for getting people engaged. How can we use these types of tools to help people kind of remain anonymous, preserve their privacy at the events, not only with the audience response, but let's even expand that, to the mobile app itself. So, I don't want to be networked by a bunch of people trying to bother me and connect. I just want to go to the event and have a good time.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll start from a higher level, and I'll let John go down a little bit deeper. But from the networking, so one of the first things that we do is we give them the ability inside the app on the profile side to select what pieces of information they're comfortable with sharing with everyone. So that in particular, right there, is sort of giving the keys to the kingdom, if you will, to the actual user. Going down that road from there. Then we also protect them where we give them the ability, if they want to network with other people, that they can share their information out there with the rest of the audience. And we allow that audience to then connect with them, and they can choose whether they accept that connection or not accept that connection. Now, once they've accepted that connection, we go one step further, and I call this stalker mode, where that person becomes a stalker, and you do decide to delete them and sever that connection. So those are some very basic, high-level things that we do. John has probably more detail for that stuff.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that we have as kind of a philosophy at Core Apps is everything needs to be opt-in. When you first log into our app, you aren't automatically published into an attendees list. You have to opt in to allowing that information. And yes, you can even go and pick what you want to actually even have in your profile in the first place, and that sort of stuff. There are, though, features that do require you to be logged in and kind of identified. And the reason why is mainly because moderation is really tough. If you allow anonymous access, you're going to get a lot more trolley type behavior inside of whatever systems you're talking about, where people are either going to make other people's experiences worse, or they're going to post inappropriate content. And so we do require kind of a little bit of verification and a little bit of publicity of yourself before certain features are open to you. However, if you want to use the app for all of the core stuff that you would normally use the app for without networking, you don't have to publish yourself, and you don't have to kind of be part of the networking features. We even went a little bit further with some of our networking stuff Jay was talking about. We have a new feature that's just rolled out recently at the first show that we did it for. We have the ability for you to actually become friends in an easy QR code scannable way without having to publish yourself. So before that, there was kind of like an email exchange behavior that we had for being able to befriend people without publishing yourself, but we made it a little bit easier for you to be able to kind of walk up to someone and link yourself inside of the app and be able to share information between each other that way. And that allows you to still stay anonymous, but allows you to selectively opt into kind of sharing with very specific people that you meet over the course of the event.
And we have had corporate clients who have come to us for internal meetings that have given us internal documents that clearly they don't want, anywhere else. And the app has been locked down from the beginning to actually the document itself. We have done all of those things to protect that. So we do have quite a sophisticated layer of security when they want it and when they need it. So that is possible.
But we really encourage people not to put that type of really private stuff in the first place,
right.
Because it has to live on our servers. And yes, we keep data separate for one event to another, but when you have it, you have it. And that means you're technically an attack vector to get some very private, confidential information. So I prefer not to have it in the first place.
The funny thing about that is I'm going to go back to that for a second. So I always explain it this way. So if I put it inside the app and I have it there, and we password protect the app, and then we password protect that particular document as well, what's to keep one of your employees from giving that to one of your other, to your competitors? And And I also point out to them that when you handed them the paper, which you used to do before you put it inside the app, and you gave it to them then, what's to keep them from making a photocopy and handed it to them? Nothing. So
Right.
you have to kind of keep that all in mind from a security standpoint, in the sense that, my dad used to say locks are for honest people, right? You lock up your bike to keep the person honest who's walking by, and I take that to heart.
Well, and I think as much as I believe that the cybersecurity is an important issue that we need to be talking about, there is also sometimes a little cyber boogeyman going on where, like you say, I always try to emphasize to folks that your digital security level should be basically the same as your physical security level. So like you said, if you're going to be handing that document to someone, they can steal it, photocopy it, or whatever. So as long as you are aware that the same thing could possibly happen in the digital world, then you're good to go. So let's take that to its unfortunate next level of consequence. So let's say someone does, either crack a password or is tricked into giving a password. We'll assume, good intent and that they didn't try to give it to their competitors. But there is a security breach. And, whether it's your app or another, technology app, it happens. What's the very first thing that a planner should do in that case?
Form a plan, I guess, is the first step, because really there's multiple things that kind of need to happen as quickly as possible. But the foresight, or not foresight, but the wherewithal to actually create a plan of attack is really what the first step needs to be, because there's multiple steps, I think, that every responsible party needs to follow when they have a security breach. The first is to try to plug the hole. Whatever it was, they need to fix the issue. The second is they need to analyze what was actually leaked, how big the impact was. Was it one account that was breached, or did they gain access to every account, or was it a set of files? What was it? And then, try to understand how big the impact was. But beyond that, they need to also identify who was impacted, who needs to be notified, because ultimately, someone, unless it was your personal, not your personal, your corporate, business, stuff, like if Core Apps' own data or business processes or whatever were leaked through an app somehow, then we'd be notifying ourselves, right? But if it was customer data, then we need to understand who was impacted so that we can help notify these people of what actually happened. So if passwords were leaked somehow, then we need to be able to notify whoever's passwords were leaked so they can be told to change their passwords, especially if they were sharing passwords on multiple websites, that sort of thing. So I think that's the high-level view of what the plan needs to be, but ultimately the first step is you need to gather the people together and formulate your own plan that kind of covers those major points.
And I know from our side, one of the things is because of the certification that we've gone through with different third parties before, we've had to set that plan. So I can tell you that we have a plan, and I would say immediately we'll go into that plan and those phases based on what we know and what we've learned from any particular security breach if it was to happen. So we would be a help to them in that sense. We would be a help to the organizer, putting that on, because I suspect that they're probably not going to know exactly what to do. The good news is that in most cases with mobile, a lot of times it's down to a single unit. So that's one of the big pluses from the mobile side. When you're talking about the event management side and things where you're on laptops and so forth, then it gets to be a little bit more outside of just being a single instance. So, but for us, we do have, and we've put together plans on our side to help them out, so that they can feel comfortable with, after it's happened, that there is something going, that we're in process of stopping as much as we can, as fast as we can, I should say.
And part of it's a PR issue, as well. It always frustrates the heck out of me when you see these breaches happen and then, days, months go by before we find out about it or before users are notified and things like that. So it's yeah, like you say, it needs to be part of that plan to get out ahead of it as quickly as possible, to notify people as quickly as possible, and to then start working on your damage control as quickly as possible, rather than letting things linger and fester and really damage your reputation if you're a tech vendor or as the planner or the company itself whose data has been, any one of the parties involved needs to be able to try and protect their reputation at that point.
Exactly.
So we made it through the show. Let's say we didn't have a catastrophic data breach. We made it through.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. We'll assume the best. What happens afterwards? So we've got all this data, on the event side, we're hearing all these great articles about how you're going to be able to prove ROI with all this data points that you're getting from your mobile apps, and you're going to see where people were and what they were doing. So we've got this enormous data set that's being either used or not used. Sometimes it just sits there. What do you guys do with the data when the show's over?
The short answer is that we keep it as long as the show organizer wants it. And the reality is that the show organizers, for all the reasons that you state, they do want to keep the data around. There's multiple reasons for that. One is to be able to compare year after year kind of how things performed. Did people use the app more than last year? That type of thing. Even down to certain sessions, because sometimes sessions are repeated year after year. They might want to be able to compare individual sessions attendance, for example, or ratings, that type of stuff. But we also offer the ability to have a single app encompass multiple years of the same show. And so it's like an ongoing reference tool. So we don't necessarily want to delete all the data right out from underneath there, because people might actually refer to it, just like people might keep printed programs back when that was the standard for getting all the data for a show. So we do keep it, and that means that we have to be continuously diligent on our side about making sure that it's protected. However, the other part that we offer, and really any company should offer this, is if a customer asks us to delete data, we will delete it. And we have done that, and I have scripts of exactly how to do that, and it's available not just for me, but for trusted engineers at our company to be able to do. So it's a standard process, and it mostly happens inside of corporate world. Although I kind of wish there was some more, other organizers that would occasionally say, actually, we're done with that data. Go ahead and delete it. It's just a lot of data to be out there and risk, be a little bit risky for us. So.
And it always would amaze me on the production side when people would ask us for PowerPoints that we had on a flash drive 3 years ago because we were running the laptops behind the stage, and it's like, well, we probably shouldn't, but actually we do. That kind of thing happens all the time, as you guys know, in corporate America. That stuff that's theoretically highly sensitive just kind of gets left around on flash drives all too often. Mm-hmm. So let's kind of move on and start looking at kind of the future as we look forward here. We're in the bottom of the year. Well, starting to head towards the top of the hour, I guess, depending on how you look at it. So we need to start winding things down a little bit. But what do you guys think is the next big thing when it comes to the event apps? And it can be security related, or it could just be in general. What are the trends that you're seeing coming down the way?
Well, I think from our side, there is one that is a little bit security related in my mind, which is something that we just had a partner summit we had a discussion about, which were chatbots. That AI learning, that artificial intelligence learning kind of thing that's going on, and there's a big initiative within IEE and PCMA and ESCA, the venue group, with regards to physical security for the venues that are going on out there. An active shooter, what do we do? How can a mobile app help us? If someone typed in some issue with regards to a security problem that they're particularly having, could that chatbot actually, from learning other things, be able to answer them and direct them to the right place to go to? So from a security standpoint, I think that is an area that we're definitely exploring. We're looking at learning more information, and we're working with a couple of different groups from Homeland Security to help guide us from their side, they don't know the technology, we know the technology, and they're working, but they know the physical security, so sort of meeting of the minds there, if you will.
I think from my standpoint, I'm going to talk a little bit more techie for a second, but it kind of goes to the core of kind of being secure with your infrastructure for a tech company. I think a trend that I'm seeing kind of arise that I'm personally very interested in, and I'm working on devising our strategy to get onto it ourselves, is this idea of immutable infrastructure. The idea is now that we have these cloud environments, instead of having servers that you manually go in and patch every so often, whatever your schedule is to keep them updated so there's no security issues. Instead, the idea is that you have very few machines that are treated that way, and instead you treat all your machines as completely disposable. The idea that you could, if a machine somehow did get breached, you could literally just delete it and start a fresh one. And with this concept, what you're doing is you're updating these kind of images of these machines, these kind of snapshots in time of what a secure machine looks like, and you're deploying it in an automated fashion, and no one is ever able to actually get onto those servers to be able to do anything manually on them. So you know that your entire infrastructure is exactly in the same state that you originally started it, and the only machines that you really have to worry about maintaining security on at that point, beyond keeping these images updated and refreshing your infrastructure periodically, is your database servers, where the actual data is stored. This idea, I think, is very powerful, and I think that the kind of virtualized environment that Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud environment, Microsoft Azure provide us to be able to do is to treat our machines as if they are disposable and allow us to kind of embrace that, which can really help heighten our security.
John, is there any concern over using, a lot of what has prevented data breaches from being worse than they are? I'm trying to work my way through this in my own head as I say it. Has been the inability to quickly parse that information and develop, meaningful, useful information out of it, because it's so big, it's random information. But with the kind of increased involvement of AI and things like that in our data, or being able to crunch large amounts of data and actually extract patterns and useful information that may not have been immediately obvious, is there any concern that as we're generating more and more of this data, with now the better AI, that we're actually creating more not breach points, but more useful information, I guess, more valuable information to be stolen?
Well, kind of. This actually goes back to one of the things you said early on, which is that a lot of people think about what type of data is contained by these various vendors, including ourselves. It's like, well, is an attendee's name and their address really that valuable? Well, it turns out that it is, because the more pieces of verifiable information that you have, that you know that this person's information is accurate, this is their personal email address, this is their cell phone number, they put it in this registration site, the more pieces that they have from various sources they can start combining together, the easier it is for them to be able to go in and gain access to bank accounts and things like that. I know that take a big leap of faith there, but can you really honestly believe that all these small credit unions out there have the best security practices in place? Can someone call up with enough verified information about this person and potentially convince someone to reset their online password or change their email address? It's surprisingly effective what people can do with, and that technique is called social engineering, and it's very effective, and a lot of companies don't have really good policies in place that prevent that sort of thing. So yes, absolutely. The more data that you gather and generate from analytics, from all sorts of different behavioral stuff, it makes it a little bit easier to be able to analyze it with all the processing power out there these days, to be able to try to draw connections that might allow them to get just a little bit more information that you thought that they actually could get from whatever data source you're worried about having the breach over.
And that's what I was stumbling around trying to get back to, was that there is no insignificant amount of information that could be taken. If you're able to compare it and and add to it and build on it, you can really take very little and turn it into something pretty useful to the bad guys. Jay, you look like you were going to hop in there.
No, I was just going to say, yeah, on the surface, a lot of times when you're talking to someone that's working with us, one of the clients, on the surface, what they're presenting to us seems pretty innocuous. But then, as John pointed out, when you're using social engineering to kind of figure all those and putting the pieces together, then it becomes, oh my gosh, it's quite a bit that they're actually getting.
Well, that starts to roll around to where I kind of I was hoping we would eventually wind up, which is obviously it's your guys' job to think about this stuff and implement security. You know, that's part of being a vendor, part of being a trusted partner. But I want to come back around to what the planners can do, what the attendees can do. You know, what are some of the tips and tricks that we can provide as technology folks for the average person, you know, so that you know, as they are the planners going into your back end, you know, using the management, using you know, the back end systems, what can we do? What kind of tips can we give them to help keep their data, their attendees' data, and their clients' data secure? John, we'll start with you.
Yeah. So I mean, the reality is that it's really hard to sum up a list of tips that you can provide someone, because ultimately I don't expect every event organizer to be an expert on security or be able to ask a question and fully understand an answer. And beyond that, often you're asking, you know, the people you're talking to at these various vendors that you're evaluating are salespeople. And salespeople, as Jay can attest, are very good about weaseling around answers that sound good that may not actually really be saying anything. And so it's very challenging for an event organizer to really understand security enough to do that. And so, you know, I focused on the idea of, you know, SSL everywhere. The kind of other question I would think that would be good to ask is one that you asked, which is, you know, what happens to my data after the show is over? And then follow up that question with, you know, if I ask you to delete my data, you know, do you have procedures to fully delete my data? And, you know, any hesitation answering those questions really does, I think, kind of help give you an idea that maybe these people don't take security as seriously as they could. But ultimately, as a person that doesn't know security, and I don't think that it's realistic for everyone to be able to learn major chunks of how security, you know, for technology works, I think that you need to find the people that you can trust. Whether it's other vendors that you end up trusting, or whether it's, you know, people that you end up hiring, you know, who are kind of their sole job is to stay up to date on security and make sure that they recommend, you know, ways for you to be secure. Now, not everyone can afford those types of, you know, positions at their company, and that's where I think that having trusted partners and vendors that you can talk to and work with really can go a long ways. Even other show organizers that maybe do have security experts can be a good resource to, you know, talk about what they do, who they use, that sort of stuff.
I think there's even a level below that where, you know, looking at folks, and you touched on it earlier about reusing passwords and things like that, where, you know, we as technical folk need to be out there saying, look, people, we need to get on password managers. You know, you can't just write it on a sticky note and put it on the bottom of the registration laptop. You know, we need to be using these things and using the tools that are available to make sure that we're not doing something stupid like that. And, you know, using the same monkey123 password, you know, for all people on using these back-end sites as well, and making sure that you know, that access is being secured, and that you know, people aren't being you know, phished to try and get access to the back end. Any tips along those lines where we actually kind of take it even another level down?
I think, you know, from my side of it, Brent, one of the things I was going to say before was I approach it this way. I say to the person, so this information that we're sharing, that you're giving me, if it was you, would you be comfortable with that level of information going out there? And if you have any reservations whatsoever, then that's probably not a good idea. So I think we should probably look at, you know, doing something else. I think it also goes back to, from our side, we've always taken the posture, and we've had to, coming into this industry, because we were the first ones going into it with a mobile app. And when we did that, we took on the responsibility of educating our clients and protecting our clients as best as we can. So from a tip standpoint, depending on what the goals are, that I may give them different tips based on that with what they're trying to achieve, like networking, making meetings, sharing other information that is out there. And then also when we gather the information and we take the analytics and they say, well, we want you to send it to a third party. Okay, well, how does, I need to be exonerated from the liability on that, number one. But number two, did you tell in your privacy policy that you were going to be doing that? And we also, while I'm on that subject there, we're not the only ones looking. I can tell you that the apps have to go through Apple and Google. Now, they review the apps. If they saw a hole, and I'm not saying that they're the greatest in reviewing that, but if they saw a hole, they certainly could deny that app from getting out there. And they have come back to us from time to time and said, you're putting this in here. Do you have a privacy policy that applies to that grants that level of access? And we've had to provide that. So we tell our clients things like that too, that could come up at any particular point. We need to see that. But going down to the level what you were talking about from the tip standpoint, I think what has happened for us, Brent, is that we've taken the posture that we need to protect them as much as we possibly can, protect them from themselves. We call it a lot of times here to make sure that that doesn't happen, because we also feel like we're on the hook for it too. As John mentioned, we talked earlier in our conversation, it could be a PR nightmare from our side, and we've seen another app provider have that. I know it affected their particular business. It's the funny thing is that it's still out there on the internet. It never goes away. That's the way that this stuff works.
Nothing ever dies on the internet.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is that most of the tips for being secure in the cyber world are the same that you would hear pretty much anywhere you go. It's, you mentioned password managers. I mean, I wish that everyone would be telling everyone to be using password managers and not to, use the same password everywhere, or even use the same 3 passwords. I mean, that's actually still an improvement, but still, once you leak one, you gain access to every other account that you have with those passwords. So, I mean, it really is a lot of standard stuff that everyone really should be looking at personally, but I don't know, we as a world don't do a good job. I mean, the whole reason why the WannaCry ransomware attack on Friday was super effective was because people didn't update their machines. And I mean, that is one of the most common things that you need to do, especially in a Windows world. But even on the Mac, you need to be updating your software regularly, because that's how you get these security patches. The reality is that there's too many people out in the world that just don't get it, and I don't know if there's much we can really boil down to a tip sheet beyond kind of the standard stuff. I mean, obviously the tips that we talked about of being aware of what you're sending to vendor and being aware of what they might be sending on to other vendors as well is a great starting place, because it allows you to start thinking about the question that Jay asked, which is, now if your data was the one that was the data that was being sent across, would you feel comfortable with that? And if you're someone that pretty much always says yes to that because you're so public and out there, maybe ask the person that is not even on Facebook. Our third founder doesn't even have a Facebook account, so he's the good privacy nut, I guess, if you want to call it that. And he'll probably yell at me.
I was going to say,
wait
till he sees that.
I know.
You call him a nut.
But the tape over the webcam and the.
But because he is so privacy conscious, he's a great person to air the same question to. And when you hear a no from the person that is very security, privacy conscious at that point, the question is, can you actually negotiate a strategy that the person would actually think is reasonable? And then beyond that, the other tip is something I said that we take as a personal, goal or philosophy here at Core Apps is, everything that involves sharing attendee information outside of your own analytics, your own personal understanding of what's going on at your event, needs to be opt-in. If you allow their information to be shared with other third parties or other attendees without them expressly allowing it, and I'm not saying in some really long terms of service when you go and fill out your registration form or something like that. I mean literally plain text checkbox that they have to check that says, I am willing to share my information with blank. If you don't have it down to that level, I don't consider it actually opt-in, because everyone knows people don't really read through all the fine print on those forms and stuff. So I think that's another big tip, is just to make sure that you have consent.
You know, this conversation made me think of something, Brett, which was I think we've become numb to the security thing because we've been let off the hook many times. I personally am one of those people who I travel a lot. I use my credit card. It's been compromised over the last 3 years, at least 3 times. It's probably an annual, once-a-year occurrence that happens to me. And because my credit card company covers that and takes care of that, you know, I try to be, because it's a nuisance, it really is, but I try to be as conscious as I possibly can. But I can also tell you that I'm probably not as conscious as I should be, and I think, you know, I'm speaking for myself, but I'm going to guess that everybody who's on this particular webcast today has had their credit card compromised at some point or another. And, you know, the credit card company has said to you, you know, they sent you a little note or a text or an email or something. You got a letter in the mail that said, hey, your card was compromised. By the way, here's your new card. Get rid of your old one and just call this number and get it set up. So that, with that happening for you, you've become very numb. And I think that's probably why we took the posture that we took, which is we'll protect for them because they're not going to necessarily protect themselves.
All right. Well, we need to start winding down. We've got a couple more questions for you. I do want to get in my obligatory. I have, anytime I'm talking about security in the least bit, I have to give my 30-second plug on venues, hotels, convention centers. Please, for the love of God, lock down your Wi-Fi. Just stop with the open Wi-Fi. Everyone understands Wi-Fi at this point. Put a password on it, any password on it, even if it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It makes it more secure than not having it at all and having an open Wi-Fi network. So that's my 30-second rant that I always have to go into. You know, we need to be past this meeting code era where that suffices for privacy or suffices for security, or punching in your room number. So if you're hitting, folks, if you are hitting any kind of web page on that Wi-Fi without being asked for a password first, it is not a secure Wi-Fi. It doesn't have the little lock.
Specifically being asked by your device. So if you're on a Mac, there will be a Mac dialog that pops up saying enter the private access key or whatever they call it nowadays. Same with your phone. If you're seeing a web page instead where you're asked to put in some access code, without ever having first typed in a password in kind of a system dialog, that's an evidence that you're on an open Wi-Fi network. And the difference is that anyone on that Wi-Fi network can see it. So.
Yep. And it's just a simple thing. Without going into the geek talk behind it, yes, honestly, even if the password's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you put that on every piece of paper in your hotel, that's still more secure than not having any password on it. So it's an extra level.
You can still force people to log in with their room number and everything. It's just to make them go that one extra step, because it does add a layer of security. So
I had to get that in. Sorry, guys. That's my one thing.
That's a good one. There's your tip. There's Brent's tip.
I've been shouting that into the wind for years now, so hopefully someday.
Good luck with that. That's why SSL is very important, because even if you're on an open Wi-Fi network, as long as you're going to a website that has that green lock icon that your browser show you, at least that website information is not being leaked over that open Wi-Fi network. So.
Well, the tweet chat's starting to shut down, so we need to start wrapping this up. But before we go, we always like to have our guests share any cool resources they might have, because that's one of the things that I really enjoy about this show, is just getting to talk to so many different people. So, cool resources. It could be websites, it could be blogs, it could be books, gadgets. We've had scuba masks. I mean, whatever you guys want to talk about. What would you like to recommend to folks? Jay, we'll start with you.
I really don't, I didn't put anything out there because we were talking security, and when I looked at what John had put, he had covered everything that I had from that standpoint, and that really, as CTO, is his bailiwick. So I'm going to defer to him.
What about, just what about life? I mean, just any good life hacks that's working for you right now? Getting an extra hour of sleep, drinking an extra glass of water, or anything like that?
Yeah, no, I think the key for me is I travel a lot, so I think the big thing from that is that we were just talking about it on our sales call today. TSE pre-check, man, that's that's what I would say. If you travel a lot, you got to have it.
Save my bacon more than a couple of times.
I think the real tip there is that if you ever plan on traveling internationally, if you're going to pay for TSA pre-check, it's like 70-ish bucks, global, like that. Yeah. Do global entry instead. It takes longer, but it's only like $40 more or something like that. It's like 110, 120 bucks instead of 70, and but that gives you TSA pre-check, but it also gives you expedited re-entry back into the United States. So if you're going to pay for TSA pre-check, consider going global entry. That's the real hack. So.
All right. Well, John, take us home and give us the security resources and anything else you want to throw out there.
So I mentioned the social engineering stuff, and I remember I gave a talk at Expo this past year on being secure and being private. And one of the things I did was I embedded this video off YouTube. So I'm going to go find that and give that here as a resource, because it really does illustrate how effective social engineering is, because basically it's this video of a woman who plays as the hacker, and this guy who's a reporter, and all she has is his personal email address and his number, and his phone number and name, and she calls up his cell phone provider and gets more access than you'd imagine. So I'm going to leave that as a non-spoiler so that you can be impressed when it actually happens. To stay up to date on security issues, the blog that I like to follow is Krebs on Security. There's a lot of great blogs out there, but this one talks about various breaches various companies have, so you can kind of understand kind of what caused the issue, because it's kind of an aggregation of all the different stuff, but it's specifically focused on security. But it also does talk about some of the, like WannaCry was all over it, the Heartbleed, all the previous major kind of issues that really anyone that wants to stay up on security should be aware of. We're covered on here. Smaller ones don't necessarily make it, so it's definitely not a end-all be-all resource of everything security, but I feel like the audience of this podcast is mostly wanting the high-level overview, and so that's where I think that's a good resource. And then I wasn't sure what all I should include here, so I personally, another place that I go, and it's very, very geek and programmer kind of centric, is called Hacker News. It's not actually hacker as in computer hacker where people hack systems. It's the colloquial term of someone who writes code is considered a hacker, is really all that it boils down to. And it's a great news site for geeks, basically. So if you Krebs on Security is the high-level security one, Hacker News is the low-level security and general programming news stuff. The last one is just an article that talks about why you should build an immutable infrastructure, because I know I touched on that as kind of one of the things I thought the future of technology was going, and it really highlights a lot of good reasons why you should consider building your infrastructure as immutable in the future.
And I'll throw one in just if you really want to go propeller head, I mean, total nerd on, full on. There's a great podcast called Security Now, and I'll put the link in the resources as well. I mean, that is really low level, like machine language level nerd speak. So if you really want to go, but it's also good. You can let most of it wash over you, but it's also a good source for news of what's going on in the security world. Well, John, Jay, I want to thank you guys so much for joining us today. We have to fly. The hour, it flies by really fast, and I really want to thank you guys for going. John, why don't you tell us a little bit, if people want to find out more about what you're up to, are you on Twitter? Is there any way people can contact you?
I kind of technically am on Twitter, but I don't really post much. I have my personal blog at nilobject.com, which is very geeky, nilobject.com, and I occasionally post there. I just rebooted it on the Medium platform, so there's not much there at the moment, but I've been adding a few things. But yeah, that's basically me. You can email me at jon@coreapps.com if you want to reach out to me personally.
Great. Well, thanks for joining us. Jay, how can people find out more about Core Apps and what you're up to?
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn with a unique name like Tokosch being the last one. You won't find too many of those. I also do a lot of things on Facebook with regards to the company and what we're doing from that standpoint too. But www.core-apps.com, don't forget the hyphen in the middle, is where you can get to all of our stuff that's there. And jay@core-apps.com is my email.
Great. Well, thank you very much for joining us as well. And thank you all out there for joining us for another episode of Event Icons. Thanks.
Thank you for joining us for another amazing episode of #Event Icons. To catch the transcription and all of the resources mentioned, head to www.helloendless.com/blog. This week's episode will be posted and available by next Tuesday. Also, let us know what you thought about this week's episode. Share your biggest takeaway and join the Twitter conversation sponsored by Alex Plaxton and Little Bird Told Media. Just tag your post with #Event Icons. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you again for joining us. We'll see you next Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern, right here on #Event Icons.
Bye.